The executioner did not hold an axe. He carried red-hot iron pincers that shimmered in the morning sun. Outside the city of Munich, in a cold field, nearly 10,000 people had gathered. The crowd fell into silence, knowing what was about to unfold was not death, but a performance of cruelty. On the scaffold, Anna Pappenheimer knelt. Her body had already been shattered by days of torture. But now, her torment would reach its peak. She was forced to look at her sons, bound to wooden posts. Just steps away, the executioner stepped forward. He reached for her chest. The red pincers clamped down. The sound that followed was not a scream, but a broken sound of hopelessness, a sound that told every soul in the field that mercy no longer lived in this world. This wasn't about justice. It was a warning, carved into scorched skin, meant to terrify a nation. But such evil doesn't appear on its own. It is built, slowly, piece by agonizing piece. To understand how the Pappenheimer family ended up at the center of Germany's most infamous witch trial, we must go back. Anna was born into shadow. Her father, the town's gravedigger, lived surrounded by death. People needed him, but they never wanted to be near him. In a world ruled by superstition, touching death meant you carried its curse. Even his children bore that burden. Anna, just a small girl, would walk through the market square and be met with stares and murmured prayers. Children fled her path. Mothers pulled their little ones close. Shopkeepers dropped goods on counters instead of handing them over. This was not a life, it was a sentence. She was marked from birth as unclean, someone to avoid, but isolation finds company. That's how she met Paulus, whose family worked cleaning sewers. His father handled waste, performing a task that kept society functioning but earned only disgust. In return, their union wasn't just born of love, though they did love each other. It was survival, a partnership between two people the world had thrown away. Together, they built something, a fortress of two against the judgment of everyone else. They had 3 sons. Simon came first, then Gumprecht, and finally Michel. With each birth came joy and dread. They knew what their children would face. These weren't just babies. They were future outcasts, stained by association before they could speak. But their tragedy didn't come from misdeeds. It came from the times. In the early 1600s, Bavaria simmered with tension. The 30 Years' War crept closer, and religious paranoia saturated every village. And for the Pappenheimers, who were already outcasts, this mix would be catastrophic. They tried to live quietly. Paulus worked endlessly. Anna kept the family together. They moved often, always on the edge of poverty, always one step away from total ruin. But when you're invisible, people start seeing you in every shadow. A cow dies. Maybe Anna walked by. A well runs dry. Someone recalls seeing Paulus near it. The whispers began long before the accusations, but whispers have a way of growing teeth. The family lived in squalor, on the outskirts of towns. They were necessary, but despised. No one offered help. And despite everything, they tried to raise good boys. Anna taught them to keep their heads down. Paulus did what no one else wanted to do. They weren't criminals. They were just poor. And in 1600s Bavaria, that was a crime in itself. By the late 1590s, the Pappenheimers' lives were no longer just difficult, they were criminal. A new law in Bavaria had made poverty itself a punishable offense. Vagrants, the homeless, families with no fixed address, these people were no longer merely shunned. They were now enemies of the state. And the Pappenheimers, who survived by drifting from town to town in search of food and work, were suddenly marked as lawbreakers simply for existing. Every day became a gamble. Paulus would leave before sunrise to search for odd jobs, hauling wood, fixing roofs, cleaning ditches. Anna, clutching little Michel's hand, would walk for hours to find anyone willing to spare a crust of bread. But every knock at the door, every passing horse on the road, carried the threat of arrest. The law didn't see them as people anymore. They were vermin. And then came the job offer. Paulus heard about it in a tavern, whispered from one desperate man to another. It paid, not well, but enough to buy bread and maybe stay in one place longer than a week. The catch: it was a night job emptying cesspits and cleaning human waste from the city's richest homes. No one wanted to do it. It was dangerous, disgusting, and deadly, but for a man with a hungry family, it was salvation. Paulus took it. When he told Anna, her face fell. Relief warred with shame. She knew what it meant. Their children would carry this Job stink on their names forever. From then on, they weren't just the poor. They were the filth handlers, the Pappenheimers. A name the town spat like a curse. Some say the name came from the paper used in public privies. Others claim it was a corruption of the place they lived. But its meaning was unmistakable. You are what you handle. And the Pappenheimers handled waste. They moved into a corner of the city no one else wanted, a slum near the tanneries, where the air itself seemed to rot inside your lungs. The walls dripped with mildew, rats ran freely, but it was shelter. And for a brief time, it was theirs. Each night, Paulus wrapped himself in old cloth, took his shovel and cart, and walked into the darkness. He returned hours later, reeking, exhausted, and silent. Anna scrubbed his clothes, nursed his blistered hands, and tried to shield the children from the worst of it. Simon, the eldest, learned to fight. Gumprecht retreated into silence. Michel still clung to his mother's skirts, trying to understand why the world hated his family. Children mocked them. Adults looked away. They were the official outcasts, now the visible reminder of what happened when you fell too far. And even this life, this fragile, humiliating routine, was not safe. In 1600, a thief was caught in Munich. His crimes were minor: some stolen food, a few coins lifted from a merchant's stall. But the city didn't want petty criminals. It wanted devils. Under interrogation, the thief did what many had done before. He lied to save himself, but his lie would change history. He said a name: Pappenheimer. The guards leaned closer. The thief spoke of murdered infants, of secret rituals in the dark. He said the Pappenheimers didn't just clean waste, they trafficked in death. They kidnapped pregnant women, butchered them, and used the unborn children to make magical candles. Candles that made the bearer invisible. Candles soaked in baby fat. It was obscene. It was insane. And it was exactly what the authorities wanted to hear. The thief kept going. He described orgies of blood, pacts with the devil, witches' Sabbaths. Beneath the moon, the Pappenheimers, he said, were not merely poor. They were monsters, killers, demons in human form. And just like that, a desperate family of beggars became Bavaria's greatest threat. They didn't know it yet, not when Paulus trudged home through the alleys, not when Anna soothed her coughing son, not when the children played with sticks outside the latrine. But their world had already ended. The executioner's fire had been lit, and it was only a matter of time before it found them. It began at dawn. As all nightmares do. Heavy boots slammed against the cobblestones. Iron slammed against wood. Doors burst open. The Pappenheimers had taken refuge in the back room of a tavern on the edge of Munich just for one night, just long enough for Paulus to rest his legs, for Anna to feed the children with stale bread and broth. They were asleep when the guards arrived. The arrest was swift, brutal, and loud. More soldiers than were ever needed to capture a family of beggars. Paulus was dragged from his bed, confused and half-naked, still reeking of waste from his night's labor. Anna fought like a wild animal, biting, scratching, screaming. Of course she did. What mother wouldn't? When men with spears tore her children from her arms, little Michel screamed as he clung to Anna's skirts. It took 2 guards to pull him away. Gumprecht tried to run. He barely made it to the door before being slammed to the floor. Simon stood frozen. He was old enough to know what this meant, that nothing good ever followed the sound of iron in the dark. The tavern keeper stood by, watching. So did the neighbors. Some crossed themselves. Others turned away, but none helped who would risk themselves for the Pappenheimers. They weren't seen as people anymore. They were already monsters in the eyes of Munich. In a gilded palace not far from where the family screamed, Duke Maximilian I read the accusations with satisfaction. He had no interest in truth. What he wanted was a message. Bavaria was a fractured land, torn between Protestant whispers and Catholic fear. The people needed certainty, and nothing provided certainty like a public execution soaked in fire and screams. The Pappenheimers were perfect, nameless, powerless, already despised. There would be no protests, no noblemen writing letters. Just a family dragged from the mud and reshaped into demons for the crowd to watch burn. The Duke ordered a show trial. Not a quiet courtroom judgment, but a spectacle. He demanded that the best torturers in Bavaria be brought in. That the family be kept alive, just alive enough to talk. Just enough to scream. The Pappenheimers were separated immediately. Paulus was thrown into the men's dungeon, Anna into a cell too small to lie down in. The children were placed in separate quarters, though quarters is generous. They were dropped into shared cells with hardened criminals, men who'd been told to fill their heads with tales of hellfire and demon blood. And then the real work began. It started with Paulus. He was stripped, shaved, searched for devil's marks. They found none. So they made their own. His thumbs were crushed in the screws, his legs smashed in wooden boots until the bones pulped. He denied everything. He said they were just a family, they had done nothing wrong, that they barely survived as it was. But denial wasn't the goal. So they brought Anna in. They made Paulus watch. She was tied to the wall across from him, her eyes wide with terror. They began slowly pinches, cuts, stretches. But what broke Paulus wasn't her screams. It was the sound of her begging, not for herself, for the children, begging them not to touch her boys. That's when he cracked. Yes, he said, we did it. We killed the women. We made the candles. We met with the devil. The interrogators leaned in, asked for details. Paulus gave them what he thought they wanted. He made it up as he went. 400 victims, he said. All of them children. No one asked how a starving man with a shovel managed to kill 400 people. No one cared. The more absurd the story, the more people believed it. Surely no one would lie about something so monstrous. Anna was next. By then, they had her husband's confession. They showed it to her between torture sessions. Told her her children had confessed, too, that Simon was next unless she confirmed it all. She did. She told them she rode on a demonic pitchfork through the night sky. That she'd had sex with devils. That she boiled babies in cauldrons for spales. Her voice trembled as she described things that never happened. Simon, Gumprecht, Michel, they weren't spared. Even Michel, just 10 years old, was gently tortured. Whatever that meant to them, he confessed. To the Pappenheimers, a family of beggars and waste handlers, were now the center of Bavaria's greatest satanic conspiracy. Their words, ripped from them in agony, were written down in perfect, tidy script, stamped, signed. It wasn't truth, it was performance. Torture dressed in legal robes. And the crowd was already gathering for the next act. They had confessed to everything. Under the crushing weight of pain and psychological torment, the Pappenheimers had given the authorities what they wanted. But the machine wasn't done, not even close. Confession was just the beginning. Now the machine needed names, because what's a witch conspiracy without accomplices? Paulus lay on the floor of his cell, his legs twisted and useless, his hands mangled, his lips cracked and bleeding. When the interrogator entered, holding a simple cup of water, it might as well have been holy. A miracle, but the man didn't hand it over. One name, he said. Just one. Then you can drink. Paulus stared at the water. He was no longer a man. He was a wound that breathed. His soul had long since bled out, but some animal part of him still wanted to survive, if only for another sip. He gave a name. Someone who once gave them bread. A neighbor. A friend. He drank. Then came another name. Another sip. More names. More gulps of relief between waves of guilt. Anna faced the same cruel game. The guards told her Paulus had already betrayed dozens. Why suffer for people already condemned? Didn't she want to see her children again? Didn't she want the pain to stop, even for a moment? She gave names to. The children were manipulated differently. Simon was told he could save his brothers. Michel and Gumprecht were told their parents had confessed everything, and that if they didn't do the same, they would be personally responsible for more people burning in hell. And so the names spilled out of their small mouths. The baker who once gave Michel a crust of bread. The tavern keeper who let Anna and the boys sleep in his shed. The old woman who smiled at them on the street. The interrogators wrote it all down. Sometimes, when the family ran out of people, they knew the torturers helped. What about the miller's wife? They'd ask. Wasn't she there at the ritual? Yes, came the whisper. Yes, she was. By the end, the Pappenheimers had named over 400 people, 400, and each name signed their death warrant. The lie had grown too big to stop. The authorities didn't want truth, they wanted proof that the Duke's justice was absolute. And now, they had it. A web of supposed evil stretching across Bavaria, every thread linking back to the Pappenheimers. Word spread fast. Whispers in church pews, rumors at market stalls. Names passed from ear to ear. Some fled immediately. Others denied everything until they were arrested too, under torture. They also began to confess and name others. The lie metastasized. What had begun with one thief's desperate fabrication now became a national panic. But the Pappenheimers knew what they had done. In the brief silences between agony, they must have seen the faces of the people they betrayed. Friends, strangers, even children, people just like them, poor, forgotten, unwanted. They had traded lives for mercy and received none. They were no longer just victims. The machine had twisted them into weapons. Their pain had become a tool of mass destruction. The interrogators celebrated. The Duke was pleased. The files were complete. The confessions perfect. The show trial had become something greater, a purge. And the Pappenheimers, they were hollowed out. Their names, their memories, their humanity burned away in that cold stone chamber. The stage was ready. Only one act remained. July 29, 1600. Munich awoke to the sound of drums and bells. The execution day had arrived. This was never going to be a quiet affair. Duke Maximilian wanted a spectacle, something unforgettable. For days, workers had prepared the streets. Barricades were set. Scaffolds reinforced. The procession route was swept clean, as if cruelty needed polish. Before sunrise, the Pappenheimers were taken from their cells. They were washed, not for dignity, but for display. They were dressed in white, the color of innocence. Ironically, it made the blood show better. And then, the final cruelty. The family was allowed to see each other. Paulus, his body shattered. Anna, emaciated and bruised. Simon, quiet. Michel and Gumprecht, ghost-eyed boys with souls already broken. There were no words left. Just the silence of people who knew they were already dead. At 6 a.m., the cart began to roll. Paulus couldn't walk. His legs had long since failed him, so they tied him up right in a wagon. Anna and Simon followed on foot, chains clanking. The boys were carried by guards, close enough to see everything. To learn what awaited them, along the route, crowds pressed in. Thousands lined the streets. Children were hoisted on shoulders. Vendors sold food. This wasn't just justice. This was entertainment. The first torture station was set at the city gate. The executioner's assistant pulled a pair of iron pincers from the brazier. They glowed red, alive with heat. Alive with heat. He tore flesh from Paulus's arms. The smell of burning human meat drifted through the air. The cart moved on. At the second station, his legs. At the third, his back. By the time they reached the field, Paulus was still alive but barely, moaning, slumped, a ragged breath clinging to a ruined frame. They tied him to the breaking wheel. No mercy blow, no final prayer. He was left there, ribs cracked open, lungs wheezing. A grotesque statue of punishment. The crowd cheered. Some wept. Others stared in stunned silence. Anna watched it all. That was her punishment, witnessing every Second dot, and then it was her turn. But the executioner had saved something special, something beyond horror. They brought Michel and Gumprecht forward, holding them tightly. Anna was dragged to the stake. Before they lit the fire, they cut away her shirt. Then they did the unthinkable. They severed her breasts, and in front of the crowd, in front of her children, they pressed the mutilated flesh to her sons' mouths, a mockery of motherhood, a violation of every sacred bond. The crowd fell silent. Even the jeering stopped. What they were witnessing wasn't just death, it was annihilation, the deliberate destruction of a human soul, of a mother, in full view of her children. Then they lit the fire. Anna Pappenheimer died in smoke and screams, her eyes fixed on her sons until the flames consumed her. Simon followed. He was beheaded, a mercy killing if that word means anything here. Perhaps it was because he'd been so compliant. Or perhaps the executioner was simply tired. Then came Michel. He was only 10, too young to execute, officially. So, instead, he was kept alive. Alive, to remember. For 3 months, Jesuits kept him under spiritual supervision. They gave him a new name. They baptized him again. Every day, they told him his parents were monsters, that their deaths were deserved, that he had to repent for sharing their blood. He stayed silent most days, didn't eat, didn't cry. On November 26, 1600, they strangled him. Then they burned what was left. Gumprecht met the same fate. We don't even know the exact date. He simply disappeared into ash. The Pappenheimers were gone. But their deaths were not the end. The names they gave, over 400, set off a wildfire of arrests. Dozens more were tortured. Others fled. Entire villages were emptied by panic. Duke Maximilian was praised. He had rooted out evil. He was called a defender of the faith. And history remembered his victory. But what should be remembered is this: the Pappenheimers were innocent. They were poor, unwanted, unclean only by superstition, and that made them perfect victims. Their story is not about witches or justice. It is about fear. It is about power. It is about how civilization turns to savagery when the right lie is told. Their name lives on, not in honor, but as a curse, a whispered reminder that the worst monsters are not those we imagine in darkness. They are the ones who wear robes and crowns, who write laws, who call their cruelty justice, and who will, without hesitation, destroy a family to prove a point.